lesson for Sew Mojo #1 are these unconventional lines. And you can see that some of them are kind of wonky, wider in the middle, and then narrow at the bottom. Some of them are short, some are long, some curve, and that's because I intended it to do that. I intended it by unintentionally doing it. Basically, some quilters call this improv quilting. I would call this just quilting with freedom, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to show you how I make these wonky, unconventional lines. And this is to get you excited about sewing. This is to get you just messing around with fabric, thinking outside the box, just having fun. And it's not going to take you very long. So in an afternoon, you can make one of these mini quilts. You can use a rotary cutter or you can use just scissors. If you use a rotary cutter, I suggest you use a ruler as well. So I'm just going to, I just said use a ruler and then I just freehanded it, but do as I say, not as I do, right? So to make a wonky strip, I cut these strips in my Quilting 101 cutting fabric tutorial. And right now this is 1.5 inches wide. But if I want to make this kind of wonky, all I do is take my ruler and slice off one edge thicker than the other. So now I have something like this. I can leave it like this, or I can make it even crazier. I can flip this, so I'm using my right hand again because I'm a righty. And look at that. Now I have this pretty wonky strip. And if I batch cut these, meaning if I just cut a whole bunch at the same time, if I have all of my narrow edges at the same side, I'm going to get this curved piece. So when you're piecing different wonky strips together, as much as you can, just to keep it relatively square-ish, match up your narrow sides with your thicker sides. Sometimes you might want it to kind of curve that way, and that's okay. So I'm going to slice up a couple more of these and then show you how to sew these strips together. I now have a handful of these strips cut out, and it's time to pin and sew. And I love these glass head needles. I'll try to remember to put a link to them. So I line up, I just take one strip and I line it up with the edges, edge to edge. And if you have a printed fabric, make sure that right sides are together. And look, the black is quite a bit taller than the white, but who cares? I'm going to trim it all down anyway. So I think one pin is good enough. Well, there we go. I'm going to keep going down my row, putting right sides together. This is a solid fabric, so solid fabric doesn't have a wrong side or a right side. It's the same on both sides, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And then once I have all of these pinned, I'm going to take them to my sewing machine and I'm going to chain stitch these. And I'm going to show you what chain stitching looks like. A really popular sewing technique in the quilting world is chain piecing. Now, chain piecing is simply sewing multiple things without picking up your foot. So your top thread and your bobbin thread chain together. And you'll see that. So I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam because that's typically what quilters sew with. I have my pieces pinned together and I'm just going to zip along. And now here is where you have two schools of thought: to remove the pin or to sew over the pin. If you're new to quilting, most definitely remove the pin. If you're, a tried and true, you've been quilting for years, I don't know, I actually sew over my pins. It's pretty bad. Sometimes I get some pretty wonky needles because they attack each other and they both break or bend. Okay, now here's where the chain piecing comes in. So you'll see I didn't lift up my foot. I didn't snip these threads. I just feed this next strip right in there. And the reason I can do that is because these feed dogs below here, I'll pull this up, you can see these feed dogs. Let's zoom in. These push the fabric through. So I actually don't need to do any pulling or pushing of fabric. I can just kind of guide it with my hands, and my feed dogs do the rest. So look, I'll even go hands-free. Let me zoom back out. Okay, hands-free. Do you see how it's moving on its own? So that just shows you how powerful those feed dogs are. And just like that, I can keep going. So chain piecing is going to save you time, it's going to save you thread, and I think it makes quilting more fun because it goes faster, and who doesn't like to go fast? Now that I've chain pieced a couple together, I'm going to lift this up, and I didn't even finish sewing this one, but look, you can see how these strips are connected and they are chained together. So all you have to do is just snip the little connecting chain stitches, and it's time to iron. Now this is my portable ironing mat, so try to ignore the weird words all over it. So I have my strips, and in quilting we use a 1/4 inch seam unless stated otherwise. So if you ever open up a quilting pattern and nowhere does it say what seam size, it's probably a 1/4 inch. That's going to be my guess. So the first thing you do when you iron is you press and set the seam, and that's so the threads in the stitch get nice and wedged into the fibers of the fabric. It makes a really secure seam. I have a dark and a light. So another tip when quilting is, as much as possible, iron your fabric toward the dark fabric, iron your fabric toward the dark seam. So do you see that, how I just gently nudge that open? And I kind of let it sit for a few seconds. And here's one strip, and you can kind of see it curves a little bit, and I really like that, so I'm going to play that up. You can stretch the fabric back to get a really straight seam, or you can kind of let it do its wonky, fibrous thing. So now that I have this ironed, I just go through and I iron each one of these strips. So just in case you get to this point and you think, oh no, what do I do? Just remember, we do right sides together, and we line up the edges, and then we pin, and we sew that 1/4 inch seam. After sewing and ironing, I got this wonderful little piece, and you can see that I have ironed all of my seams toward the black and not the white, and that's so the seams don't show through the lighter fabric. So to get my horizontal stripes that butt up against my vertical stripes, I cut out just some wonky little pieces of fabric, and I'm going to sew these together just like we did in this unit. Well, as you can see, I went a little bit crazy, and this one is quite a bit taller than this unit, but that's okay. So I currently have Unit 1 and Unit 2, and both of them look crazy. So let's fix that. Let's trim them to fit. I'm going to make this a little bit more angled just because I like that look. So I'm just going to trim that a little bit. Now I'm going to put this on top of that one. Do you see that? I'm going to use that as my guide. So it's going to have this nice angle right here. So I use my ruler, I line it up with the edge of Unit 1, and I give it a slice. Ooh, so now I have these two perfectly straight edges that I can sew together. So before I do any more trimming, I'm just going to go ahead and sew these together. I think that's probably easiest. I like having the dark on top. And this is where you as an artist just need to make decisions. You know, remember, this is not going to be a blanket that someone's going to wrap up in. This is not going to a contest for someone to judge your skills. It's just for you to have fun. So, you know, whack a little bit there, cut a little bit there. If your seams fall apart, who cares? Yeah, just have fun. So I'm going to place right sides together, just like this. And I'm going to pin a couple times, and then I'm going to sew this together. Now you get a very weird looking this, whatever you want to call this. I ended up ironing my seam toward the light fabric in this situation just because there was so much bulk right here. Really doesn't matter. Okay, so now is the exciting part, because this is when it's like opening up that package at Christmas, because when you trim it, it's going to look so good. This is when you can decide if you want it to be square or not. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball square that top side up. And then I'm going to use my ruler guide to keep it square. Cut that one. I'm going to rotate it all so that I can keep using those straight edges as a guide. So here I'm using this right here as a guide. I'm lining it up. And I'm slicing toward myself because, as you saw in my Quilting 101 cutting demonstration, I like to do that. I think it goes faster. And the final, the grand finale. Now, a lot has happened since I trimmed this. I got some batting, and I used 100% cotton batting, and I spray basted it. And you don't have to do that. You can use safety pins, you can use regular pins. This is so tiny that it really doesn't matter how you baste it. I would suggest basting it because otherwise it could shift a little bit on you. So I spray basted it, and I do that outside because the fumes and the spray can just kind of go everywhere. And you can see that this is kind of wonky. I'm going to trim this batting down, but you'll definitely notice that I did not use backing, and that's because I'm going to put this in a frame, or I'm going to hang it on the wall, or this is just practice. But I didn't feel the need to use backing. You can. It's really not a big deal either way. I also did some machine quilting. So I always use my walking foot, and I just used a cream thread, and I stayed pretty even. I did 2 stitches on each black stroke, each black line, and now I'm going to embellish this with some hand quilting. Yippee! This is the fun part. This is so fun. Okay, so my hand quilting supplies. I'm in love with this thimble. My husband found it on Google, and he Googled best thimble, and then he said, you should get this, and then I did, and I love it. It really is the best. It's leather, and every time you use it, it just gets better and better. You can see I use it a lot. So that's my thimble. Just some little scissors. I think these are cute, but whatever works. And I really like these Clover Goldeneye embroidery needles. I've tried other needles, and I'm sure there are good ones out there, but I got a brand new package because they're my fave, and I love them. Size, whatever you feel like. Whatever fits into your hand. Okay, so here's where you can really play as an artist. Do I want to stay monochromatic? Do I want to add a pop of color? What do I want to do? I mean, I could do really anything. I could do some pink, I could do a rainbow, I could do something really subtle, maybe a different color on each one. This is where you just kind of decide what you like. Green, that's kind of nice. I have a whole little basket of these and I'm always ordering more. This is DMC Pearl Cotton number 8. That is what I like to use. I like it thick. If I'm going to go to the trouble of hand quilting something, I want people to see it. So I use a pretty thick thread. Now I'm going to decide what colors to use. I decided to go with navy because I think navy's cool and I like navy and black. So I'm going to knot my thread, just a simple double knot. Now I'm going to show you how to hide the knot of your thread. Even though you don't really have to on this because it's so small, you can always just insert it really easily on the back. But I'm just going to show you in case you want to use this technique on a large quilt. So I'm going to zoom in nice and close. You can see all the little lint on my black. And if you want to hide the needle, you insert it a little bit away from where you want it to start. So I want it to start about here, so I insert it a little bit away. And I just skim the top. I don't go all the way to the back. You can catch that batting, but if I had backing here, you wouldn't want it to go all the way to the batting. And then I pull it through, just like this, and I kind of stabilize it with my fingers. And I pop it. Did you hear that pop? And so now, if you can see that, well, if I have some batting right there, but that knot is totally hidden. So if you're quilting on a quilt and you just start your stitches in the middle of the quilt, you're not going to have all these weird knots showing. So I place my thimble on my finger, whichever finger is more comfortable to you. And this is where you do a rocking motion. So I just start in and out. And I'm doing it on a table, so it's a little bit different. But I try to get a little bit of, I try to get a few stitches, 2 stitches with each follow through. You know what, on that dark fabric, you really can't see very well, can you? I'll switch to light and I'll show you. Because it was kind of hard to see the stitching on the black fabric, I'm going to show you how to do the stitching on the white fabric, just so you get a better idea. So there's a lot of rocking. You kind of rock the needle in, rock it out, rock it in, rock it out. It's like quilting super rock and roll. You didn't know that. And I made my thread pretty long because I hate rethreading needles. If you get a needle threader, it makes it a lot easier, but I still just like to probably make my thread longer than it should be. And the more you practice this, the faster you will get and the more precise you will get. And as you can see, my stitches aren't totally even. I'm not that precise, but I like it like that because if I'm going to do something by hand, I want it to look like it was done by hand. I don't want it to look like it was done, you know, by like a cyborg. Like a machine. I already did my machine quilting, and so now I'm going to do my hand quilting. But about 1/8 of an inch is usually what my stitches end up being, whether or not that's like what I'm trying to do. So I usually do 2 stitches at a time. And you can use a hoop, or you can lay it flat on a table, or you can set it in your lap, depending on how big it is. This is pretty small. I've now added all of my stitching, my quilting. You can see I did these cute little X's, and I kind of let it gradate, kind of like stars, so it's, you know, getting smaller and getting fewer and further between. I'm going to trim, and then it's the end. So you square it up just like you're trimming a quilt. So I line up this top side with this guide mark, and I line up the edge with the edge of my ruler. And I just go through and I keep flipping it and making sure that it's all lined up. And I trim it. How fun is that?